Hello and welcome to the Automation Insider. I'm your host, Joe McGrath with Hy-Tek Intralogistics. And today I have an old friend who's agreed to help me figure out some stuff about financing, and how that relates to automation. So, Drew, say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Lein. I've spent most of my career at the intersection of supply chain and finance. The last several years working with businesses to evaluate different investments, including operational and supply chain augmentations. So, whether it's automation or supply chain optimization, the principles of how businesses can evaluate these kinds of projects through a financial lens is somewhat universal. Excited to talk to you today, Joe.
Yeah, awesome. So I design a lot of really cool systems, and when all the excitement about designing stuff is over, somebody's like, "How are we going to pay for this?" Right? Uh, and admittedly, pretty important question. And it happens on 100% of projects I've worked on. It has to make money. So how do we do that? So that's kind of the kind of the context here. Um, why does finance matter in automation? Like a super high level, right? Like these systems are for-profit companies typically. They have a bottom line that they have to meet, and right, it kind of makes the world go round. So, really simple setup for what is a really complicated topic. Um, so let's jump into maybe the first kind of section here, financial foundations. So, like, what are kind of the underpinnings, or what are the things that we have to have day one to understand the finances of a project?
Yeah, to maybe go back just a second, like from a financial perspective, an automation investment is just like any other investment the business makes. So that capital has to have a return. So having an understanding of how it impacts the financials and what the internal financials of the project are important. From a process standpoint, my preach within in organizations, good processes lead to good transactional data. To be able to have an operations analyst kind of sort through the mountain of transactional data that, and be looking for opportunities, whether that's understanding cycle times or the inefficiencies of the business to really bring that to light. I had the pleasure of working with several really great operational analysts over my career. Um, and the ones that are the best really bring finance along for the ride. It's one thing just to identify inefficiencies in your business, but when you can financialize those opportunities, then you can really start to drive value creation with these types of investments.
Uh, I think it's a really good point. The beginning of my career, I found a whole bunch of ways to, hey, we can improve this, right? And then someone says, prove it, um, and and you can try, but man, it's a lot easier if you get the finance guy to help you prove it, because it provides an unbelievable amount of weight, and it's about the exact topics or about the data points that your company needs to hit to succeed. And so I found that telling the story with a finance partner is way easier than just doing it from purely engineering perspective.
Right, and bringing them in early. A good finance partner can quickly grasp the underlying concept, get up the knowledge curve, help frame that opportunity, and then start to drive some of the due diligence that's really necessary to make a significant investment for the business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So what are some of the things that you need kind of foundationally to start, like maybe with the financial analysis?
I mean, I think for me, it's really a good, clean, reliable data set. Excel is a great tool, but it's not a database. Generally, ERPs, when you get them out of the box, they're not really set up for analytics outside some of the just the general basics. I think the real value is really reaching behind the ERP, getting into the tables to really get some of the source data, and then bringing having that ERP sourced information really brings credibility to the diligence that's required for some of these significant investments.
Uh, Yeah. Okay. So like you're definitely not the first person to go on the podcast and say you should have good data. Data is important. So thank you very much for echoing what is a very common sentiment. What if you don't have great data? Like what are some things to think about? You're a smaller company. You've just got your ERP together. You're sure trying to figure this project out. Any notes there?
And then it's really getting down to like, okay, like how can you make it simple and how can you model some of the economics of your business, maybe in Excel. And I think that's having worked in companies that are in a state of transition, working very closely, I think partnering up an engineering skill set with a financial skill set to really, put together what's the economical model of the business to really, use that as a baseline to understand what's going on within the business today.
Okay, very cool. And then in terms of tools, like I'll dip back a little bit. So Excel, like Excel's Excel. I don't want to dwell on that too much. It's a known quantity. Uh, ERPs have some analytics built into them, but beyond that, other like other tools or tool sets or like special sets of skills that you would recommend or you would look for, when starting an analysis.
I think, some of the great tools, kind of in the supply chain analytics area are really around optimization and simulation. So, being able to really kind of take a digital twin of the business that you have and put it into, one of those simulation or optimization tools to really start to play with, how you can influence the entire end-to-end network. There's a number of them out in the marketplace. I'm not an expert in any of them, but there are certain modeling skill sets that people have developed to really be able to make those type of tools uh, really valuable for organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of this convergence of a lot of folks saying, "Hey, this is really complicated. Can we put this into a sim, and can we learn from it?" And it's a lot of different groups. It's not just engineering doing a little simulation by themselves to make sure the process is okay. Right? It's not just material scientists. It's everybody. Like, what variation doing for work? Like, what's the economic variation of I don't know our raw materials?
Well, and it does another thing too. It really kind of takes how the business works out of the mind of, maybe some choice people within the organization, and kind of puts it into a group activity to really understand how the business is, and to really see it, transpire digitally.
Right? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so now we have some data. We got some tools, right? Uh, we might have Excel. We might have some cool analytics package. Um, so now we want to start doing an analysis of our project, right? Um, like, what's the first kind of step in setting forth in a financial analysis?
Yeah, I think the first thing with any of these types of analyses is really to understand the baseline. So, any investment that you make, really have to understand what the incrementality, but you need to know what are you improving from. So, this really simple basic example. You got $100 in cash today, not making any return. Well, I can make an investment in a bond or something like that. That incremental return is really kind of what we're trying to get after. So for automation projects, it gets a little bit more complex than that. Really having understanding what are my fixed costs versus the current setup. What's uh, labor rates and how many FTEs do you need, and also your variable costs. What's the energy load of our system today? What kind of temp labor do we need? Having those two cost structures in well understood, and then from a revenue standpoint, similarly, basis my current business today. I have a certain amount of capacity. That capacity is a driver of revenue. And so now you can construct kind of a baseline P&L that you can then start to tweak with different types of scenarios.
So I've been a part of a bunch of projects, and there's like the process engineering type of modeling. I spend a lot of time doing that, and I'm always kind of surprised, like when like there's like a finance or accounting person's like, oh, let me take a look at that, right? Like because it has some of those pieces in there. Now, like how I got to where I got, like maybe everybody doesn't love it, or maybe they're fine with that, right? But we do try to figure out like when we're setting up machine counts, like how many people is going to take to operate that. What is that going to do to their shift structure? It's a very multivariate situation. Okay, so you build the model, right? You baselined it. You know what you do today. Um, uh, your integrator partners help you set this up. Gives you a model for what it should do tomorrow, right? Uh, I've been pretty accurate. Um, so how do you do that? Like, what's the comparison look like there?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to the drivers. It should be a driver based model. So, working very closely with the process engineers to really understand what are the drivers of some of the scenarios that you're taking a look at, whether that's experiencing a workload or workforce change, and having an impact on your fixed costs to increasing cycle times that then has more opportunity for revenue in the future, and really start to put together a set of scenarios that can that are one reasonable and two attractive, and that's really where to really bring forward a couple of discrete scenarios to evaluate. That's really the easiest way to approach it.
Okay, cool. And then we kind of talked a little bit like pregame, but you had mentioned that like stress testing your models or your analysis is an important step. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's important for for any model, particularly financial models, to really understand what are the big drivers of the overall project. You know, things like if there's a revenue element, what you're going to charge for that incremental revenue that you're able to capture. What's the utilization rate of that equipment that you're assuming. What's the labor expenses, and really bringing it, if you're using a driver based model, to really then say, okay, of the 30 different uh, driver inputs that we came into this project with, understanding kind of what's the range. How low can it get? How high can it get? And you can get even more sophisticated in putting distribution models within there to really encapsulate what are the potential ranges of that particular variable, and then using a tool like using like a Monte Carlo analysis to really then say, okay, in aggregate, what is the potential range of outcomes on this entire project, but then also looking, kind of flipping it on its side and saying, okay, of all the different drivers, what are the most important, that has the most impact on the financial returns of the project? And then you really use that to say, okay, are we really sharp about these three drivers, and make sure that we have additional support, additional maybe additional views on what we expect for those.
Yeah, no, I guess really good. Like I've done a couple of models and they're pretty complicated models about how the process works. And it's interesting that someone from finance can not understand the entire model, take a swing at like the high level of it, and then tell me what the hey, these two things you need to dial those in, right? A lot of time, like oftentimes we see some kind of square footage play. There definitely is a labor play in pretty much all of these, but it's interesting how dialed in you can get. Uh, that's awesome. Okay, so now we have some models. We've stress tested them a little bit. We probably iterated and we've worked with like all the different teams internally to build a good tool for this analysis. Let's take a look at evaluating uh, this. So step one, like what are the different kind of levels of analysis that you would take a shot at? Like not all projects are created equal, right?
Yeah, not all projects are created equal in terms of size and scale and complexity. And so all of them, it kind of depends on uh, what you're trying to get after. And I think about it in kind of three layers. One, there's really kind of a basic view of really just looking at a payback. I spent $100, basis the financial model. We intend to recuperate that in 6 months. And I think that's pretty easy to understand for a lot of people. It really brings it makes it simple for folks. And then you can go to the next layer and really getting into more sophisticated models using like the time value of money, like in a discounted cash flow analysis, where you're looking at longer time frames, maybe different scaling and different ramp up periods. Um, and there you get, you'll start to look at things like net present value, or NPV, or internal rate of return. And here in this area, then you start to be able to have more definition and granularity to compare different scenarios. There might be one project that has a significant return, but it might be a significant amount of money to invest as well. And so you can start to then look at trade-offs within those different scenarios, to really make a more holistic decision for the business. And then you can bring in some more of the advanced views where you're ascribing costs to things, like sustainability metrics, for example. There's seen businesses where they have a significant cost of water, or carbon, or electricity, and really bringing in kind of a virtual view of sustainability within their financial model.
That's super interesting. And you've done a bunch of work in Europe as well. And sustainability gets like tossed around a lot. It's like, hey, we want to look at sustainability, and then a lot of time, especially on the U.S. side, like it's like the very bottom of the analysis, and like well, we don't use too much power, so it's okay, right? Like like, on the other side of the ocean, like what's the experience with sustainability like?
And it's amazing when the price of your, whether it's water or carbon, is compulsory. It's not just a fictional number, or a voluntary number. So you see a different level of projects that get funded, and you get different questions when you have those more compulsory sustainability components. But I think at the end of the day, I think sustainability, a lot of it's been focused really on cost savings, and whether you have a very specific compulsory cost savings, like they do in Europe here, or on a voluntary basis in the U.S. I think uh, it certainly gets boiled down to that. It really comes down to costs.
I imagine that like having compulsory sustainability, like financial targets, yields a lot of different like project types or different shaped like networks, maybe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how how the grid gets how the grid is how they generate power on the grid is really, it really helps in some of the location analysis as well.
Very interesting. Okay. So we have like kind of a good, better, best maybe approach to like levels of analysis, how deep you want to go, depending on the type of project it is. Um, like talk about like how maybe different types of ownership might evaluate projects differently. I think like this is something that surprised me more the more I got into like kind of the project approval kind of phases of my career. No,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably largely tied to the organization's financial goals. We can maybe bookend it a little bit. So, like on one end, you got the high flying startup. They've got uh, the hockey stick, in their business plan. So they're really looking at uh, being more growth orientated and scaling into larger investments. And so there, they're going to be really more focused on the analysis using discounted cash flow analysis and focusing on things like terminal value. So, at the end of this investment, like what do I have and what sort of cash flow does it generate for me long term as I try to, sell that or go public, for example. And then you maybe swing to the other side where you have maybe a medium to large family run organization, where they're maybe more concerned about cash flow to make dividend payments so they can, buy, the next Ferrari or whatever. So I think they probably would have an emphasis on evaluating things like EBITDA or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, which is a proxy for cash flow. So I think, depending on, what the organizational, what they're trying to commit to their investors, I think you'll see that as you look at how they evaluate different projects.
You notice a big difference between like public and private companies. I guess as a follow up on that.
And I think it kind of it's the same. What level of conservatism or risk taking do they have? And I think that kind of lends itself towards the different types of metrics that are more apt or more aptly can be applied to that.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And then we talked about sustainability a little bit because this is a regional factor. But what are some other kind of regional like emphases that get placed on financial evaluations, kind of beyond sustainability?
Yeah, beyond sustainability, I think when we're looking at different investments, you know, labor certainly has a lot of variability just in the US and then even globally, has a huge impact. And for projects like these where it's really kind of focused on the labor component, it's part and parcel to how if you're looking at it from a geographic basis. And then energy rates, I think, is the other major component that will have a lot of variability, whether you're on a consumer choice network or you have to tie up to a utility, whether you have the ability to do cogeneration through solar array on top of the building. I think there's lots of variability in how you can think about or uh, understand the variable cost side.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned that like there's a lot of like labor movement in the U.S. One kind of trend I've seen is not straight up labor reduction. It's companies are having a lot of trouble finding labor, finding the type of labor, um, and it's you can't do the simple like, well, I don't need as many heads, and that's this many hours, and blah blah blah. Talk to me about like how that analysis works when there's just not enough labor.
Well, I think it's I was just talking with a CFO last week, and on top of like just the kind of the amount of labor, but seasonality was an impact for him. So being able to take 'cause you'd have to staff for the busiest of the busiest months, but as he brought in automation into his process, he was able to kind of flatten his labor needs, really focusing on rather than doing the actual kind of work, but more skilled jobs that really were managing exceptions and managing some of the robots.
Yeah, I noticed you kind of increase your capital in an operation, and it brings the floor up on like that labor swing, right? So now like instead of like for Pete, you go from 60 to 120 people, maybe you're going from you know 20 to 40, right? Still a 100% swing, but that the absolute number is like a lot lower because that capital is just kind of absorbing all that work that
Yeah,
she's within all.
absolutely, absolutely.
Is there do you find that there's often like an inflection point that's like a good starting like spot for this? Like how much? I think the example is, do you want to build the church for Easter Sunday? Is what a lot of people say, right? And so you have a huge like labor swing throughout the year. Like have you been asked this question? Like how do you manage the analysis when you're asked this?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think it probably will depend on kind of the industry and kind of what the demand profile looks like. If you can, if you're in a high growth market that can maybe accommodate that in 4 or 5 years, that's an interesting conversation then to build something smaller today and then having to build a whole nother thing, just a couple of years from now to satisfy that demand. So I think the great thing about bringing it from a financial modeling perspective is that you can start to answer those questions because that type of analysis is squarely a use case for discounted cash flow analysis to really understand if I make a big investment today versus a smaller investment, what does my overall profile look like as we scale into this demand environment that we're expecting.
Very cool. Now, I've seen a lot of the automation industry trend towards more modular or like smaller. I call it like incremental purchase. So I can buy less and less automation, I can get a more continuous like match to whatever that customer's demand profile is. Uh, like this, the finance teams tend to look more favorably on like technologies that scale easier. Like where does that drop into the
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's if you think about it from an investment perspective, like a modular investment, if you can scale it appropriately, you can kind of match one the demand or what the business actually needs when they need it. And if you can do that and you can kind of match the capital outlay at the same time, you have a much more perfect union between, from a financial perspective on optimizing a better return because you can kind of match that as the demand grows.
Good. Very cool. Um, all right. So let's do a quick recap of what we learned today. So first things first, understand the basics. Do you have data? Do you have kind of command of your process? Do you have the tools that you need to perform an analysis? Uh, from an analytical perspective, um, establish a baseline, model your scenarios, stress test a little bit, and involve the entire team. And then from an evaluation perspective, understand the kind of level of evaluation, uh, and then try to understand the context you're doing that evaluation in. You know, private, public, large, small, conservative, liberal versus right. And then obviously there's regional impacts as well. Any other like important things that maybe like a little engineer like myself might need to know when designing a project for a customer in terms of finance?
I mean, I think there's things that people forget. Things like maintenance costs. For a big capital investment, thinking about maintenance costs and how is that maintenance that is capitalized maintenance, or is it more expensed maintenance?
Those could be a big scary gotcha if you don't talk about that up front. Yeah, no,
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Other things that you need to take into consideration if it's a project related to a growth initiative, working capital. That needs to be part of the overall equation just as much as the capital is to buy the equipment. The working capital in terms of inventory and receivables will also change within that framework. Um, and then how exactly you finance that equipment also is something to take into consideration, whether it's debt finance or equity finance that has that interest payment and potential tax shield. It's kind of more minutia in cash flow analysis, but can have an overall swing in how to think about one scenario versus another.
but it's actually really interesting. We do get a lot of questions about, hey, can you finance the equipment? Like, like it's tough, and a lot of the customers' finance teams are going to have like way more skill and experience and better contacts to do that. But the one thing we do talk about on occasion is We call it RAS or SaaS. So it's like software as a service or robotics as a service. So essentially like rental or lease models. Have you messed with those ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the lease versus buy analyses, which is kind of a classical financial problem within kind of the corporate business setting. It's you know, on one hand, you're kind of embedding the cost of that financing within the expense, but on the other hand, it comes at a significant cost, which uh, you know interest rates, have been climbing over the last, 12 to 24 months. So the cost of capital just for everybody has been improving, and that just kind of increases the bar for any investment to be able to exceed.
No. All right. Drew, thank you very much for hopping on and talking with me. This was very educational, very insightful. It's These are things that maybe I don't think about until it's too late in the project, right? And so, uh, very good to get your take on it and reinforce the way I'm thinking. It's fantastic. For those watching at home, thank you very much for tuning in. Be sure to check out our next podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Even check us out on Spotify. And thank you very much.